We asked BP to look at using a different dispersant. They've been using the Corexit. We asked them to look and get back to us and give us an alternative. I wasn't satisfied with the answer that we got. The answer we got back from BP to me seemed more like a defense of their current choice.
To date, none of the seafood samples analyzed for these compounds have concentrations that exceed EPA's and FDA guidelines, ensuring seafood reaching the marketplace is safe to eat.
These tests are only for oil compounds. Turns out, no one is testing these fish for possible contamination by that controversial dispersant, Corexit.
We need to develop a protocol, a method for detecting these chemicals in fish. We learned yesterday from the federal agency in charge of that, NOAA, that they don't have a protocol to find these dispersant chemicals in game fish or commercial fish.
Gulf Coast environmentalists say federal agencies like the EPA and the Coast Guard haven't been tough enough on getting BP to scale back dispersant use.
This has never been done. So this type of volume, this type of application, it's all really a giant science experiment, and we're terribly concerned that in the long run the impacts are going to be significant, and we just don't know right now what we're doing to this ecosystem.
With South Louisiana crude added to it, you can see here now South Louisiana crude with no chemical added after 1 day, reduced survival down, not 1.5 anymore, down around 1.2 or so. But after a month, we're detecting no effect on survival of this fish with just South Louisiana crude. But look at the dispersant. Survival's half. And you see, and look at this column over here. This column over here. This is with a tiny crustacean, a Daphnia, very tiny, think of a tiny shrimp type thing. It was more sensitive. The same pattern applied. No oil, no chemical. There's our survival, nice throughout the experiment. South Louisiana crude is toxic, and the dispersant alone is toxic, and dispersant and oil are even more toxic than just the oil alone. But the fish is more robust, stronger, more resistant to that toxicity than this tiny little crustacean. And that's the best model I have to go with on, say, shrimp. This is a little tiny worm that lives in the mud. A chironomid larva turns into a fly during some adult part of life. It's a little tiny red worm that lives in the mud. You see, it's really sensitive to crude oil. I mean, its survival was fine only where we had no chemical at first. Any cleaner was bad, the dispersant was bad, oil was bad. And it wasn't until 6 months later that you start to see some survival with the South Louisiana crude alone. And with the South Louisiana dispersant, there's no survival even after 6 months. It's a shrimp food. That's why you care about worms. The surprising thing to me was that 6 months later, even after a lot of biodegradation of South Louisiana crude, even after that dispersants had time to be biodegraded, it's still toxic. And this is when you take out and you add a new worm to it. The worm died within I think it was a 48-hour test, a couple of days. So that's the possibility of what we're looking at.
We asked BP to look at using a different dispersant. They've been using the Corexit. We asked them to look and get back to us and give us an alternative. I wasn't satisfied with the answer that we got. The answer we got back from BP to me seemed more like a defense of their current choice.
And that's what that Corexit does. It ruptures red blood cells, causes internal bleeding and liver and kidney damage. So this stuff is so toxic combined. It's not the oil alone, the dispersant alone. It's the dispersed oil that still contains this stuff. It's very, very toxic, and it goes right through skin.
Dr. Susan Shaw is a marine toxicologist. EPA now is taking the position that they really don't know how dangerous it is, even though if you read the label, it tells you how dangerous it is. And for example, in the Exxon Valdez case, people who work with dispersants, most of them are dead now. The average death age is around 50. It's very dangerous, and it's an economic protector of BP, not an environmental protector of the public.
The answer we got back from BP to me seemed more like a defense of their current choice. Reminded me a little bit of that old commercial, I'd rather fight than switch.
Of transparency and accountability.
The launch of this public site is designed to facilitate transparency.
And our democracy depends on transparency.
The Coast Guard and EPA issued a directive to BP on May 26, instructing BP to apply no more than 15,000 gallons of dispersants per day and to halt use of surface application unless conditions on the ground limited the use of other methods of dealing with the oil, skimming, and burning. Since that directive was issued on May 26, we have seen the total daily volume of dispersants used fall by 72% from their peak levels. By 72% from their peak levels. By 72% from their peak levels.
So how can BP and the EPA claim they've made these huge reductions in dispersant? Turns out the devil is in the details. That EPA directive reads, BP should reduce dispersant application by 75% from the maximum daily amount used. The maximum daily amount. That happened on May 23rd when 70,000 gallons were used, by far the most ever put into the water. So they have significantly reduced the amount of dispersant used based on that one single day, but on average, the decrease is much, much less. And even by the EPA's own standards, BP has gone over the 18,000 gallons a day limit it can use, 50% of the time.
And they are currently using dispersant at the site of the leak, injecting it. They use a lot less when they do it down there than they do when they spray it on top.
The EPA and Coast Guard say BP mostly complied, reducing its dispersant usage by 68%. But did they really? Turns out, not really. We crunched the numbers. According to dispersant data released daily, between April 30th and May 26th, an average of more than 25,000 gallons of dispersant were used each day. Since May 26th, the day EPA directed BP to cut back, the daily average use has only dropped to a little more than 23,000 gallons a day. That's only a 9% drop.
We haven't seen anything to date on the shoreline. If I have any reason at any time to believe that the dispersant is hanging around in the water column, ending up in the fish, ending up in the air we breathe, then we would stop it. We also ordered BP to work with federal government scientists to identify less toxic alternatives. 2 weeks ago, EPA released the first round of scientific testing of these alternative dispersants. The good news there is that none of the currently authorized dispersants appear to show significant endocrine disrupting activity, and it appears that all the products have roughly the similar impacts on the aquatic life tested.
Thank you for taking time to view this video. Due to rising concerns from the American citizens regarding the use of the very toxic Corexit products used for cleanup of the Deep Horizon spill, the EPA was forced to conduct toxicity tests. On June 30th, the EPA announced its first round of dispersant test results. The 8 dispersants tested were chosen for this first round of testing, not only due to their availability, but also their low toxicity. This chart was taken from the EPA website. What it demonstrates is how much dispersant in parts per million it will take for there to be a 50% mortality rate of Menidia, also known as silverside fish, in a 96-hour period. The 2 dispersants highlighted in red are the results I want to share with you today. Keep in mind the June 30th EPA announcement by Paul Anastas, and I quote, JD2000 and Corexit 9500 proved to be the least toxic to small fish. Again, JD2000 and Corexit 9500 proved to be the least toxic to small fish. Now let's get to the test results. Corexit 9500 tested at 130 parts per million for a 50% mortality rate, classified as practically non-toxic. JD2000 tested at greater than 5,600 parts per million. And by the way, this is for a less than 20% mortality rate because they never could achieve a 50% mortality rate because of saturation. So they just put in the best result they could get. That's the highest result they could saturate. Also in the practically non-toxic category. Now I ask you, federal agencies, based on these numbers, which one of these two products should have been used in the Gulf? Which one should have been stockpiled? Which one should have been ordered? The answer is obvious. The numbers are in. JD 2000.